Matriarch Beatrice Adeyemi, revered chair of the Adeyemi family enterprise, had been away for 3 months. Long enough to weigh the future of her grandson, Adrian Adeyemi, the quiet prodigy destined to helm the family's storied law firm, Adeyemi and Company. Adrian's brilliance was legend, but so was his vanishing act. He kept a spectral distance from publicity, his face almost mythic even inside the company. On the firm's main floor, anticipation crackled. Whispers flitted between desks, shy laughter popped like bubbles, as staff traded rumors about the invisible heir. "They say he's devastatingly handsome," breathed one junior associate, and another sighed, "and impossibly rich." The fantasy of catching the bachelors, I spun giddy daydreams across the bullpen. None of them imagined the heir would soon stand among them, unrecognized, listening. Beatrice had no appetite for ceremonial entrances or flattering speeches. She wanted truth, not theatrics. So the matriarch slipped into the building in plain clothes, a headscarf, and an old wristwatch that gleamed the cheap shine of a market knockoff. She chose a cleaner's trolley over a chairman's escort, deciding to study the firm with her title hidden. She had a private mission as well, to find a partner for Adrian who would love the man, not the surname. Her disguise drew barbed attention from a cluster of office fashionistas. "Who let her in?" one of them scoffed. "Look at that watch, trying to cosplay wealthy," another drawled. Their laughter, fat with cruelty, spilled into the corridor. At first, Beatrice merely observed, eyes like surgical steel, letting the jabs ricochet harmlessly. But when a woman stepped close and accused her of pretending she belonged among upper-class people, Beatrice answered mildly, "It's just an old watch. Why does it trouble you?" That calm truth only inflamed them. A shoulder bump sent the matriarch rocking backward. Before the scene could curdle further, a clear voice cut the air. "Enough." Nia Okoye, young, poised, assured, stood between Beatrice and the hecklers. "She's doing her job. Don't you have briefs to file?" The group traded glances, then a ringleader sneered. "Says the woman who got dumped for being nosy. No wonder you're single." Nia did not flinch. "I wasn't dumped," she replied, cool as a judge's pen. "I left. I don't cheat for boyfriends, and I don't tolerate liars. It's called self-respect. Try it." The sting landed. Their bravado frayed. The women retreated, muttering. Nia turned, gentled. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Beatrice offered a small, genuine smile. "Thank you, dear." "Any time," Nia said, shrugging off the moment. "And if anyone bothers you again, tell me." Beatrice watched her go, the faintest, secretive smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "A good heart," she murmured. "This one's different." A little later, with the floor settled, Beatrice rolled her trolley to Nia's desk. "Excuse me, dear, may I borrow a moment?" Nia glanced up, warmth returning to her features. "Of course. How can I help?" Beatrice sat, curiosity bright in her eyes. "I couldn't help overhearing your colleagues." "You're single?" The older woman's tone softened. "Would you consider marrying my grandson?" Nia blinked, smiled politely, the question too sudden to hold. "That's kind, but I'm not looking for love. Not now." She hesitated, then added, "I've been hurt. My last boyfriend, also a colleague, cheated. Here." I walked in and well. She lifted a shoulder, letting the humiliation pass through a practiced breath. "You're right to be cautious," Beatrice said, voice steady with conviction. "But my grandson is not like that. His parents died when he was very young. I raised him. He has a loyal heart." Nia's smile was gentle, non-committal. "That's sweet. I'll think about it," she teased lightly, until the door opened and a young man stepped in, handsome in the quiet way of someone used to listening before he speaks. Simple clothes, elegant posture, the kind eyes of a careful mind. "Grandma," he said warmly. Beatrice's face lit. "Ao, there you are." She beamed at Nia. "This is Ao, our new intern." The young man extended a hand. "I'm Ao. It's a pleasure." "Nia," she said, cheeks warming despite herself. "Welcome to Adeyemi and Company." He grinned. "I've heard this is the best place to learn." Under cover of a mop and an old watch, the matriarch's plan had just moved its first silent piece across the board. On paper, Ao blended in new badge, intern workstation, a stack of intake forms. In practice, Adrian moved like a seasoned observer, absorbing names, rhythms, and power currents with the patience of a cross-examiner. A few people dismissed him with the casual snobbery reserved for support staff. Most were kind enough. Through Beatrice's custodial nudges, Ao was assigned to Nia Okoye on a high-stakes matter, drafting arguments for a prominent client. Nia, a rising star at the firm, took lead counsel. Ao's role was to assist, research, and learn. He did more than that. Within hours, he was spotting conflicts in case law and proposing cleaner chains of authorities. "You're surprisingly good at this," Nia said, brows lifting as he tightened a paragraph with surgical precision. He chuckled. "I read a lot, mostly because I like learning from people who care as much as you do." Color rose in her cheeks. "That's kind of you." From a distance, Beatrice polished a non-existent smudge on a glass wall and listened to their laughter like a satisfied conductor hearing the orchestra tune. Later, Nia's phone buzzed. "Mama," she answered brightly. "When will you bring your boyfriend home?" her mother asked, hope tumbling over every syllable. Nia's stomach fluttered. "Soon," she lied softly. "You'll meet him soon." She ended the call, guilt pooling beneath her ribs. The office, meanwhile, spun with a fresh rumor. Adrian Adeyemi, the elusive heir, was finally due to show face and assume control. "Do you think he'll pick a special team?" someone asked. "He'll choose the best," declared Kira, a sharp-elbowed associate who wore her ambition like perfume. "And let's be honest, most of you aren't it." Kira caught sight of Nia returning from the corridor and smirked. "Well, if it isn't the Queen of Average," she announced. "Don't embarrass yourself trying to join Mr. Adeyemi's team. You're a low-tier lawyer from a no-name school." The words hit like cold rain. Before Nia could answer, Ao stood. "That's enough," he said evenly. Kira looked him over, amused. "And you are?" "An intern," he said, unruffled. "Who knows that respect and kindness last longer than cruelty? If Mr. Adeyemi values talent, he'll see Nia's first." Kira laughed. "Adorable. Stay in your lane. People who succeed lift others," Ao replied. "Not shove them off the staircase." She rolled her eyes and stalked away. Nia exhaled, gratitude softening her features. "Thank you," she said, voice low. He shrugged, smiling. "I don't like bullies." Days braided into weeks. Late nights over pleadings became easy conversation. Shared victories, tiny celebrations, and between citations and closing arguments, a quiet tenderness unfurled. Ao finally asked Nia to dinner. Respectfully, gently. She said yes. Their closeness fed Kira's bitterness. She started hunting for moments to sabotage Nia's work, waiting for the mistake that would confirm her contempt. One afternoon, she engineered it. She swapped a critical exhibit in a presentation packet Nia and Ao were about to deliver. At the last second, Ao noticed an off-by-one reference and traced it to the wrong attachment, correcting the file before anyone else knew a crisis had tiptoed into the room. Kira's smile curdled to ash. "Lucky," she hissed to Nia. Ao's patience thinned. The charade was snapping. He wanted to speak his name aloud. He did. In the open office, he said, "Everyone, there's something I should make clear. I'm not only an intern. I'm Adrian Adeyemi. I came undercover to understand how we treat people when titles aren't watching." Laughter burst, loudest from Kira. "You, Adrian," she cackled. "Be serious." Even Nia tugged him aside, eyes huge. "Ao, please don't do this. If the real Mr. Adeyemi hears you're impersonating him, it could ruin you." His expression tightened, hurt flashing, and then swallowed. "Nia, I'm telling the truth." She shook her head, protective despite her disbelief. "Drop it, please." Then Daniel, Nia's ex, drifted over like a bad draft. "Wow, Nia," he sneered. "From cheater to pretender. Your taste is consistent." Ao's jaw set. "Insult me if you must. Leave her alone." Daniel smirked, piling on. "What are you going to do, hero? Quote me to death?" "You've defamed her more than enough," Ao replied. "And that has consequences." Before the exchange could curdle further, HR arrived with security. "Daniel, your employment is terminated effective immediately," the manager said. "You were warned about your conduct. This is the end." Daniel sputtered, then spat, "This isn't over," as he was walked out. Nia, shaken, tugged Ao into a side office. "This is spiraling," she whispered. "If you keep saying you're Adrian, you'll be the one in danger. Let me talk to him when he arrives. I'll protect you." Ao looked at her with a tenderness that almost undid him. "Thank you," he said, knowing the only protection he needed was the truth, and that it would break her heart before it healed it. That night, Adrian called Victor, his trusted secretary. "Tomorrow, come to the firm and be me," he said. "I need to see how they behave when they think the CEO is in the room." Victor chuckled. "Unusual, sir, but understood." Morning arrived draped in nerves. Suits were sharper, shoes shinier, voices pitched an octave higher. At 9 on the dot, Victor strode through reception in a tailored suit, authority hanging from his shoulders like a robe. "Good morning," he said pleasantly. The staff parted as if a tide had shifted. Kira became all deference and sugar. "Mr. Adeyemi," she purred, "I've admired your wins for years." Victor nodded, neutral and unreadable. "Let's have a diligent day." Across the floor, Ao stacked some files and watched quietly, a thin smile ghosting his mouth as Kira's fawning multiplied by the minute. Nia, by contrast, kept to her work, focused, steady, refusing to chase the spotlight. From her custodial vantage, Beatrice missed nothing. She barely blinked at Victor's performance. Her attention remained on Nia, the woman whose first instinct had been protection, not performance. Perfect, she decided. Now to nudge destiny. That afternoon, Beatrice slipped into Nia's path looking paler than usual, one hand pressed to her chest. "Are you all right?" Nia rushed to her, concern overriding everything. "I'll be fine," Beatrice said, breath thin. "My heart isn't what it was. Before I go, I want only one thing, to see my grandson marry a good woman. Someone like you." The words landed like a stone in a clear pond, concentric ripples spreading through Nia's quiet. "Me," she managed. "He cares for you." "I can see it," Beatrice went on, voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "Please think about it." That evening, Nia sat in her small apartment, turning the plea over in her hands. Ao had been unfailingly kind, steady, brave in the face of mockery. So unlike the men who had disappointed her. Her phone lit. "When are you bringing your fiancé home?" Her mother texted, buoyant. An answer formed, reckless, hopeful. "Soon." Across town, Adrian's phone buzzed with a message from Beatrice. "Come. Urgent." He arrived to find his grandmother reclining on the couch, pale as paper. "Grandma," he whispered, panic leaking into his voice. "I'm not well," she sighed, then opened one bright eye. "Marry Nia." He blinked. "Grandma, she's agreed to think about it," Beatrice pressed, triumphant. "Life is short, Ao. Don't waste time." The next day, Beatrice orchestrated a chance meeting. Herself looking frilier, the room arranged to tug at conscience and heartstrings. Nia and Ao sat side by side at the matriarch's sofa as she played fate like a violin. "You two mean so much to me," she murmured. "Let an old woman see happiness before she goes. Will you consider marrying?" Silence stormed the room, then cleared. Nia exhaled. "I will," she said, voice steady with a courage that surprised even her. "My mother is waiting for a son-in-law, and Ao, I've fallen for you. I don't care about status. You are kind. That is enough." Ao's breath hitched. "I feel the same," he said, first-person honesty rolling free at last. "I'll spend my life making you happy." Beatrice's recovery was instantaneous. Wonderful. A simple ceremony. Immediately, their eyebrows shot up. Her energy had returned with suspicious speed, but momentum carried them forward. The registry wedding was small and luminous. Nia wore a modest white dress that made the room look overdecorated by comparison. Ao, in a crisp suit, gazed at her as if reciting a vow with his eyes. Beatrice arrived in a riot of florals, satisfaction radiating off her like warmth from a kitchen oven. The happiness was real, so was the thorn Adrian could not ignore, the secret of his name. As the couple ate a celebratory dinner, he leaned toward his grandmother and whispered, "What happens when the truth reaches her?" Beatrice patted his hand. "Good intentions matter. She will understand." He smiled, but the worry stayed like a knot he couldn't untie. Back at the firm, jealousy fermented. Kira decided it was time to end Nia's rise for good. In a team meeting, Kira stood with an air of righteous fury and brandished a folder. "I have evidence that Nia leaked confidential materials to a competitor," she declared. Gasps. Nia reeled. "That's a lie." Kira held up emails bearing Nia's name. Murmurs flitted. Ao clenched his fists beneath the table, ready to flip the board, but his intern label kept him still for the moment. After the meeting, he found Nia. "I believe you," he said simply. "We'll figure it out." She nodded, grateful and terrified. Word sprinted to Beatrice, who quietly mobilized favors and resources. Meanwhile, CEO Victor maintained neutrality. "We'll investigate thoroughly," he told Kira, who expected instant validation and instead received the cool patience of due process. A week after the registry wedding, Nia's life felt like a tightrope over a crowd that wanted a fall. One late evening, building lights humming like bees, Nia worked alone on her defense. Coffee called from the break room. As she passed a conference room with its door ajar, voices threaded out. She froze at the sound of Ao's, familiar, beloved, and Victor's. I have to end this masquerade, Ao said. Nia doesn't deserve darkness. I tried to tell her. She couldn't believe me. Now that we're married, I can't let the lie breathe. Victor's answer was careful. Revealing your identity could complicate her position, especially with Kira's accusations active. Nia's breath went thin and sharp. Sir. Victor had said sir. I am Adrian Adeyemi, Ao replied. The disguise was only to observe the culture. The words detonated softly and completely inside Nia. Pieces of the last months clicked into place, the insight, the poise, the grandmother's insistence. She waited at home, heart galloping. When Ao walked in, he read the room in a single glance. You know, he said gently. Nia folded her arms, hurt and love wrestling for ground. I overheard you. You're Adrian Adeyemi, and you married me without telling me. He nodded once, accepting the blow. I tried to tell you, he said, voice raw. You begged me to stop because you wanted to protect me from the real Adrian. I didn't want to lose you, Nia. I didn't want you to feel I'd trapped you with a name. She studied him. The humility she'd always known, the truth she had not. Why not before the vows? I was afraid, he answered. Afraid you'd think I'd manipulated everything. I married you for one reason. I love you. And I still owe you a grand wedding if you'll have me. Anger softened, not erased, like a flame turned low instead of out. I need time, she said at last. But I'm not leaving. Relief loosened his shoulders. Thank you, he breathed. The next morning, the intern disappeared. Adrian Adeyemi reappeared in full, the firm's de facto gravity restored. He kept a professional distance. Only Nia knew that the forbidding CEO was the same gentle man who'd once carried her takeout when she forgot to eat. She said nothing. Let the office talk. Soon a new rumor sprinted through the corridors. Adrian had taken a private jet to Paris to buy a legendary necklace, the heart of the ocean, as a declaration of love. For his wife, someone whispered. He doesn't have one, someone countered. Kira, spinning drama like candy floss, leaned in. For his first love, she said. Celine, old money, immaculate lineage. She's the real Mrs. Adeyemi. As if conjured, Celine arrived, radiant, lacquered in designer shine, wearing a diamond pendant that threw constellations onto office glass. I'm Adrian's wife, she announced smoothly. People flocked. Kira shot Nia a sideways smile heavy with condescension. Some of us should know our place, she said loudly. Celine approached Nia, saccharine smile shaped like a blade. You must be Nia. I've heard so much. Nia held her ground. Nice to meet you. Celine's lashes dipped. Pressure can be hard in a place like this. I hope you won't take it personally if things don't go your way. I can handle myself, Nia said evenly. The smile cracked, then reset. Best of luck, dear. That evening, Adrian picked Nia up. She stared out the window, silent. He waited, then asked softly, What's loud in your head? She exhaled. The necklace. Celine. He pulled over, reached into the glove compartment, and took out a velvet box. Inside, light pooled and scattered, the real heart of the ocean. He fastened it around her neck, hands steady. This is for you, he said simply. Only you. Her breath hitched. Celine is a ghost, he continued. A closed chapter. You are my wife. The doubt evaporated like mist. I love you, she whispered. I love you, he answered, forehead to hers. Now, let's not keep Grandma waiting. She'll want to see you wearing this. The war at work, however, had not ended. With Beatrice's quiet backing and Adrian's unseen resources, Nia dug through metadata, access logs, and camera timelines. Days later, she presented a blisteringly clear defense to the internal panel. Headers proving the alleged leak originated from Kira's account, plus surveillance showing Kira entering the archive after hours. Murmurs erupted. Kira blanched. This is fabricated, she snapped, only for the door to open and Celine to glide in. Don't try to drag me under, Celine said coolly. But I'll confess my part. Gasps. She admitted coaching Kira and feeding her forged materials to sabotage Nia out of envy and nostalgia for Adrian's attention. Adrian stepped forward, voice ironed flat. You harmed an innocent woman and stained this firm's name, he said. Security escorted both women out to the sound of 100 unspoken apologies. Adrian turned to the staff. As for my time here as an intern, I wasn't learning documents, I was learning us. Faces tilted, stunned. And one more thing, he added, eyes softening as they found Nia. Nia Okoye is not just our colleague. She is my wife. A silence like snowfall. Then the thaw. "Mrs. Adeyemi, we're sorry," someone said. "We were wrong," said another. Nia stood, shoulders squared. "This isn't about me," she replied. "It's about ending bullying, rich or poor, powerful or powerless. Harassment is illegal and immoral. Learn it now." Adrian nodded. "This culture changes today." Heads bowed, lessons began. That night, in the hush of his office, Nia leaned into Adrian's embrace. "Thank you for standing with me," she said. He smiled. "Always. You're my compass." Outside, the city pulsed. Inside, two people breathed in sync, beginning again, this time with every mask on the floor. The firm's temperature had finally dropped, yet an aftershock hummed under the carpets and glass. Apologies found Nia in stairwells and elevators, some faltering, some sincere. She accepted none as currency and all as data, letting people show who they wished to be after the mask was off. Adrian kept to measured distances in public, the way a conductor steps back to let an orchestra breathe. Privately, he and Nia were relearning one another with honesty as the only dress code. That evening they took tea on the balcony of the penthouse, Lagos glittering like a circuit board beneath them. Wind teased Nia's hair. The heart of the ocean lay cool against her skin. "There's something I've never told you," Adrian said, setting his cup down. His voice wore a softness she now recognized as the place truth lives before it is spoken. "Why I became a lawyer." Nia arched an eyebrow, amused and curious. "Because you like arguments in black robes?" "Because of you," he answered, and the steam between them thinned into stillness. He reminded her of a schoolyard long ago, the edge of a field where boys who hated wealth but wanted its power cornered a quiet teenager. He remembered how insults curdled into shoves, how humiliation pried at his ribs. Then a girl, eyes fierce, braids loose from running, had stepped between him and the pack. "Leave him alone." She had announced, as if reading a verdict, that she would become a lawyer and call their behavior by its legal name. The boys had laughed, then shifted, then left. She'd turned to him, asked if he was okay, told him to stand up for himself next time, and walked away as if the world was an argument she intended to win. "Was that?" Nia began, stunned laughter catching in her throat. "You," Adrian said, smiling. "I recognized you the first day you looked up from your desk and told a pack of adults to stop bullying a woman with an old watch." She stared at the city to steady herself, then back at him. "All these years," she murmured, incredulous and melted at once. "You held on to that?" "Some moments," he said, "become a compass." Silence, companionable and full, settled around them. Below, headlights stitched the bridge into a bright vein. Above, the sky forgot its arguments with the sea. "There's one more thing," Adrian added, almost shy. "Beatrice wants what she has wanted since she taught me to tie a tie, great-grandchildren." He winced theatrically. "She will be insufferable until she meets one." Nia flushed, then laughed, swatting his arm. I noticed her enthusiasm. "She means well, even when she nudges like a bulldozer," he said, and the image was perfect enough to dissolve them both into laughter. When the laughter ebbed, Nia leaned into his shoulder. "We'll choose our timing," she said. "We'll choose everything together." He pressed a kiss to her hair, relief held between lips and promise. Below them, the city kept its bargains with the night. Above them, two people revised their vows from for better or worse to for honest or nothing. Days regained a rhythm. The cultural reset Adrian demanded began not with memos but with modeling. Senior partners sat for anti-harassment training. HR introduced a whistleblower pipeline that bypassed every manager. Beatrice, no longer mopping glass but still watching, made clear that promotions would reward courage and collaboration as much as billables. Some grumbled in private, most adapted, a few left. The air thinned of fear, the building exhaled. At dinner the next weekend, Beatrice set 2 steaming bowls on her table and watched the young couple over the rim of her glasses. "You look different," she announced. "Like people who have told each other everything." "Almost everything," Adrian said, glancing at Nia with a secret the size of a cathedral. Nia squeezed his hand under the table. Beatrice's eyes danced. "Good. Now about Grandma," they chorused, and the room filled with laughter. 3 generations, 1 joke, and 1,000 unspoken blessings humming in the lights. Late that night, after dishes and stories, Nia opened her laptop to revise an affidavit and felt the tug of fatigue pull at her eyelids too soon. She closed the file, promising herself an early night, unaware that her life was already drafting a new brief, one written in tiny heartbeats. Celine sat in her car outside the mansion, the engine off and her reflection a pale moon in the window. She had told herself love was an argument she could still win if she found the right evidence. Then she had told herself it was about justice. Then she had stopped telling herself anything that required courage and chosen sabotage instead. She watched the security lights trace their slow arcs across trimmed hedges, waited until a delivery truck left the gate, and walked in with the posture of someone who had never been told no. The housekeeper was on her break. The chef was inventorying the pantry. Celine moved like a roomer, quiet, quick, and aiming for the soft spot. In the kitchen, a bottle of wine slept in a bucket of ice. She took out a small vial that slid across her palm like a sin she'd rehearsed too often. A few drops bled into the wine. She decanted a glass, carried it to the living room, the place Adrian liked to sit after work, and arranged her face into a memory. This will remind him, she thought, of what we were, of what we could be again. What she had not rehearsed was Beatrice Adeyemi arriving without notice, as matriarchs and miracles are wont to do. The older woman stepped through the door and paused, first at the sight of Celine perched like a velvet warning on the sofa, and then at the single, sweating glass on the table. Her gaze sharpened. "What are you doing in my grandson's house?" she asked, politeness folded around iron. Celine's smile was switchblade smooth. "Catching up, Beatrice. We share history." Beatrice walked to the table, lifted the glass, and inhaled. Years of kitchens and hospitals and boardrooms had given her a Sherlock's nose. The sweetness was wrong, the acid too thin, the smell of danger a whisper at the back of the throat. Her expression did not change, but the temperature of the room did. "Security," she called, and two men appeared as if she'd pressed a button on the wall. "Escort Ms. Celine off the property. She is not to return." Celine's composure cracked. You only tried to turn a drink into a decision," Beatrice said, the words quiet enough to sting more than a shout. "Not here. Not with mine." The guards moved. Celine struggled, then realized there are doors you can only exit once, and let herself be carried by the consequences she had mixed. Beatrice waited for the gate to sigh shut, then picked up her phone. "Nia, dear," she said, and when Nia answered breathless, "Come. Now." Nia arrived to find Beatrice in the foyer. The house hushed as if listening. "She came in," Beatrice said, "and she hurt the wine. I stopped the drink. I did not stop the ache." She peered at Nia over the rims of her glasses. "Go to him." Without waiting for permission, Beatrice guided Nia to the primary suite, gave the room a nudge with her palm as if arranging fate, and closed the door with a conspirator's click. The lock turned. "Sort your priorities," she called from the hall. "Thank me later." Nia stood in the stillness, pulse naming every second. Adrian stepped from the closet, tie loosened, worry already on his face at the sound of her footsteps. "Beatrice?" he asked. "Celine," Nia said, and watched anger steam beneath his calm. She told him what had almost happened. He told her what had not. "She is finished with this story," he said, voice steady. "Whatever the past was, it ends at our gate." Nia's shoulders dropped as if she had set down a suitcase she hadn't noticed she'd been carrying. "I believe you," she said, and the relief in him was visible, another mask lifting, another hallway of the house lit. He took her hands. "I will keep choosing you in public and in private, in headlines and in footnotes," he said. "You are not competing with anyone. There is no one on the track but you." They leaned into each other. No stage directions, no artifice, only the strange, ordinary miracle of two people caught by the same gravity. When the door finally opened again, Beatrice was gone from the corridor, but a small plate of puff-puff and 2 mugs of tea waited on a tray as if conjured. Nia laughed, tears salt-sweet. "She's impossible," Adrian said, smiling. "She's family," Nia corrected. The next morning, legal reality followed moral clarity. A trespass complaint was drafted. A lifetime ban from Adeyemi properties was entered. The access list for staff and vendors was revised. Celine's last gambit had not just failed. It had named her to the one list she had never wished to join. Persona non grata. And still the world turned, because it always does, and the business of the firm returned, motions filed, discoveries exchanged, clients shepherded through difficult truths. By afternoon, Nia felt a wave of exhaustion bite at the edges of her focus. She ate what Beatrice would later scoldingly call a bird's lunch, drank water, and carried on, unaware that a quieter plotline had begun writing itself in her body, one that asked nothing of courts and everything of hearts. The investigation panel reconvened in a sunlit conference room with walls that had heard too many secrets to be surprised by new ones. This time, the chairs held different weights. Kira's seat was empty, her access badge disabled. HR's lead counsel sat beside compliance. An outside auditor joined by video to certify the process had been clean. Nia presented the last thread of her tapestry. Server access trails that mapped to Kira's credentials, time-stamped after-hours footage, and a chain of custody log that made fabrication mathematically implausible. The panel chair closed the folder with a nod that held apology and respect. "Ms. Okoye," he said, "on behalf of this firm, thank you. You are fully exonerated." News traveled fast. Some colleagues who had watched gossip the way people watch fires, fascinated, complicit, silent, came to Nia with eyes that did not yet know how to look at themselves. She listened, accepted nothing performative, and returned to her work. Adrian, for his part, made 2 announcements. First, a restorative justice initiative, mentoring, sponsorship, and a path for those who wished to repair harm done by complicity to do so in ways that weren't PR but practice. Second, a formal code that tied compensation to culture-building metrics as tightly as to revenue. A few partners threatened to leave. Adrian held the door open for them and closed it behind their backs with the relief of a house that has shed a faulty beam. That evening, he invited the entire firm to an internal town hall. He spoke briefly about trust, longer about humility, and longest about the kind of victories that matter. Those won without breaking the people who helped you fight. Then he did something few CEOs do and fewer do well. He asked for questions with answers that might cost him comfort. The questions came about the undercover experiment, about lines between accountability and surveillance, about how to rebuild with those who had been wronged. He answered without defense, only explanation, and conceded where he had erred. When it ended, the room felt lighter not because the past had been erased, but because it had been named. After the town hall, Beatrice intercepted Nia in the corridor and performed the world's least subtle pivot. "A small public celebration," she mused. "Registry weddings are noble, but Lagos is a city. It enjoys a spectacle. A grand wedding?" Nia teased, eyes dancing. "A wedding that says, 'We were honest and we are not hiding,'" Beatrice corrected, then added, unable to help herself, "and one with good music." Plans that had once felt like bank robbers, exciting and terrifying, now felt like blueprints, ceremonial, logistical, human. Victor drew up lists that bent but did not break. The firm's PR team winced, then smiled, then got to work. Nia chose a designer whom she liked in fittings and in silence. Adrian refused a palace and insisted on a garden where vows could be spoken under trees older than any career. It was not about diamonds, it was about daylight. In the middle of it, Nia found herself in the restroom at the office one afternoon, gripping the edges of a sink as a wave of nausea rolled and broke. She rinsed her face, took 3 slow breaths, and returned to her desk with a determination that had gotten her through worse. But a second wave came the next day, and a third the day after. Beatrice watched without watching, the way elders do, and said nothing until saying something would taste like a gift. That Friday, over jollof and stories, Nia excused herself from Beatrice's dining table, went pale in the hallway, then returned with an apologetic smile and a hand on her stomach. Adrian stood, chair legs scraping a question into the floor. "We're going to the hospital," he said, already reaching for his keys. "It's probably nothing," Nia protested gently, but his face had already chosen tenderness over bravado. Beatrice, clearing plates, hummed a song from a much earlier century and did not bother hiding the brightness in her eyes. "Well," she said to the dishes, "some prayers answer themselves." The drive to the clinic was quiet except for their joined hands. In triage, time became a polite thief, stealing minutes and giving them back as suspense. A technician smiled in the way of people who are about to say a sentence that will rearrange furniture in a life. "Congratulations," she said, and the room acquired new gravity. Nia laughed and cried at once. Adrian laughed and could not stop, which is how the nurse later told the story to her colleagues. About the CEO who thanked everyone twice and then once more as if gratitude were oxygen. When they told Beatrice, she danced in her slippers in the foyer, clapped once, and declared that the wedding must now be twice as beautiful and half as loud. "We honor the new," she said, wiping her eyes with the heel of her hand, "by keeping the joy gentle. Lagos, which often measures love in decibels, would have to forgive them their softness." The garden was reserved. The vows were being sharpened, not for spectacle, but for truth. The firm, bruised and wiser, was beginning to stand straighter. And somewhere in the measured dark of a womb, A heartbeat argued convincingly that futures arrive not because we schedule them, but because we learn how to be ready. The morning after the clinic visit felt like standing on a shoreline at low tide. The sea pulled back to reveal patterns the waves usually hid. Nia woke before the alarm, one palm resting over her abdomen, as if to steady a secret that had already steadied her. Adrian turned at the rustle, sleep-soft and unarmored, and smiled the way people do when happiness arrives without fanfare. They did not speak first of calendars or clinics or cribs. They spoke of gratitude, which is to say they made a list of names, nurses, technicians, Beatrice, and promised to thank them in ways that felt like verbs. Practicalities arrived next, wearing their sensible shoes. Adrian drafted a brief email to the executive team requesting a noon town hall. Victor booked the auditorium and hid a box of tissues behind the lectern in case courage needed them. Before they left for the office, Beatrice phoned with advice disguised as gossip. "Eat something more than air," she told Nia. "And wear flats. Pride has terrible arch support. Then quieter. When you tell them, let the joy lead. Not the fear." The line stayed warm in Nia's ear long after it went dead, like a hand that doesn't rush to let go. At noon, the firm gathered. The auditorium held the low thrum of 100 lives put briefly on pause. Adrian stood at the front, not larger than life, simply the right size for it. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice finding the room's natural frequency. He spoke first of the investigation's closure, of reparations owed and underway, of a policy spine that would not bend even when profits leaned. He named Kira's termination without relish and confirmed that an outside review had certified Nia's exoneration. Then he did something no memo would have advised. He apologized again, for the experiment of his disguise, for the unintended harms, for the way secrecy distorts trust even when intentions are clean. He did not beg absolution. He asked for partnership in repair. Only then did he turn to Nia and reach for her hand where she sat in the front row. A murmured question rose. The sound people make when they're not sure if the moment belongs to them. "We have personal news," he said, a smile slipstreaming into his words. "We married quietly weeks ago. We owe our families and this community a celebration. And if all goes well, we will become parents." The room gasped the way a city inhales when power flickers and comes back stronger. The applause began in a shy corner and spread, uncoached and whole. Some clapped for joy. Some clapped for the way truth makes space wider. Some clapped because they realized that love, inconvenient and luminous, had walked into their workplace and refused to hide. Afterward, questions came, careful at first, then earnest. A junior associate asked about parental leave. HR, prepared by Adrian's midnight emails, presented a policy draft. 26 weeks paid primary leave, 16 weeks secondary, flexible reentry, no penalty in evaluations for time taken. An older partner worried aloud about client expectations. Adrian replied that excellence did not require cruelty, and that boundaries sharpened, not dulled, a professional's edge. A paralegal asked whether whistleblowers would be protected if the offender sat at a mahogany table. Adrian said yes, and pointed at the independent pipeline already live on the intranet. Trust does not return all at once. It returns like birds. One, then two, then a sudden flock. Legal machinery turned outside the auditorium. Celine's trespass and attempted harm were logged with the police. A restraining order was filed. Her lawyer brokered a plea that kept prison from the conversation, but attached conditions as heavy as any cell. Mandated counseling, community service, a public apology she would give to the city rather than to the firm to avoid weaponizing Nia's grace. Daniel, for his part, attempted a last, graceless flourish on social media. The HR file spoke for itself. When he requested a reference, he received a factual letter and a suggestion to seek the kind of help that requires listening more than speaking. That evening, the three of them, Adrian, Nia, Beatrice, sat around Beatrice's table as steam from okra soup fogged the air. "Announced?" Beatrice asked, eyes bright and wicked. "Announced," Adrian confirmed. "Applauded." "Some," Nia said, smiling. "Enough." Beatrice set down her spoon and folded her hands. "Then let us draw 2 lines in the sand," she said. "First, no more hiding. We celebrate in the open. Second, nobody touches this child's mother without answering to me." She rapped the table once, a gavel without pretense. They laughed, but they also heard the oath inside the joke. Outside, the city flowed around their quiet like water around a rock. Inside, a new center of gravity had already formed. Later, on their balcony, Adrian and Nia drafted vows for a ceremony not of spectacle but of witness. They promised to be each other's home address, to fight fair and clean, to speak truth before it soured. They wrote a line about work, that the law was their craft but not their master. Adrian added a sentence Nia underlined twice. I will never ask you to shrink so that I can be seen. She added one he read 3 times. When fear visits, I will answer the door with you. When they were done, their words felt less like promises than like maps. Somewhere between midnight and morning, Nia rolled over and whispered, Flats tomorrow. Adrian laughed into the pillow. Pride can sue, he said. Your arches have counsel. The laughter carried them to sleep, and sleep carried them to a dawn willing to be kind. The garden chose them as much as they chose it. Old acacias bent in courteous approval. Jacarandas rehearsed to confetti the city would not need to sweep. Victor, with a binder that looked like a small country, orchestrated permits, seating plans, and rain contingencies. The florist walked the grounds and whispered to leaves as if negotiating a plea. Beatrice vetoed a crystal arch and demanded a simple aisle. Let the trees be the chandeliers. The planner nodded as one does to someone who has won more arguments than time. The tabloids tried to alchemize the registry certificate into scandal. Headlines auditioned. Billionaire heir's secret bride, office romance upends empire, mystery necklace, and the woman who wears it. PR declined to play the game and issued a single statement the size of a palm. 2 adults married. We wish them joy. The firm continues its work for clients and community. In the absence of oxygen, the fire found another country to burn. On a Thursday night, Nia stood in a studio of light and mirrors as a dress took her measure. The designer, a woman with needles behind her ear and sense in her eyes, listened more than she spoke. I want to move, Nia said. And to breathe. The designer smiled. Then we will give the fabric the same instructions. They chose ivory that did not glare, a neckline that declared without boasting, sleeves that remembered the dignity of wrists. When Nia stepped onto the platform and the pins lifted the hem into a line that made mathematics jealous, she saw herself. Not a billboard, not a lesson, only a woman about to choose a life twice, once in law and once in daylight. Adrian had fewer fittings and more calls. Accessibility routes, elders transportation, a choir that could fill a canopy without scaring birds. He wrote and rewrote a note to staff inviting them to attend as witnesses, not employees. He called the garden manager to ask whether the oldest tree had a name. We call her Mama, the manager said. Then we ask Mama to host, Adrian replied. The manager laughed the kind of laugh that makes a contract binding even before ink touches paper. On the morning of the ceremony, Lagos woke early to claim its weather. The sky arrived undecided and then chose benevolence. Guests found their places amid green that had been growing its whole life for this hour. The choir hummed a key that turned the air. Beatrice arrived in ossoak the color of ripened mango and hugged staff. She had once pretended not to recognize with the ferocity of a grandmother who knows that families are chosen and built, not just born. Victor checked his watch and quietly to himself, allowed a smile to escape and run around the block. Adrian walked down the aisle alone, not because he had no one to offer his arm, but because he had chosen to stand where Nia could see him, steady and unhidden. He wore a suit cut like an argument that ends with consensus, and a tie the blue of the necklace he had fastened around her throat weeks before. When the music turned, low strings, then a flute, everyone stood as Nia appeared at the curve of the path with Beatrice at her side. The older woman did not give the bride away. She escorted her, as one steward passes another a legacy that weighs exactly what it should. Under Mama's branches, they faced each other. The officiant, a judge who had mentored them both, laid aside the voice she used for verdicts and borrowed one from lullabies. We are here to witness what happens when truth survives its tests, she said. She asked no one whether there were objections. The wind kept its counsel. Nia went first, reading vows in the clear diction of someone who knows words can build houses. She promised respect that does not flinch, delight that does not depend on weather, disagreement that never chooses contempt. Adrian followed, and when he reached the line he had written about never asking her to shrink, a murmur rippled the crowd. The sound of recognition, like a room remembering a song. Rings were passed like small planets. Beatrice held her breath, and then remembered to let it go. When the officiant pronounced them, the choir did not explode. It opened like morning. They kissed with the tenderness of people who had already learned that love's temperature is not measured by volume. The applause was loud enough for joy and soft enough for grace. Somewhere nearby, a child began to laugh and could not stop, which felt like a benediction. At the signing table, the judge leaned in and whispered, "Counselors, you may now be each other's counsel." Camera shutters stitched the moment into memory. Staff queued to greet them with embraces that felt less like congratulations and more like joining. Victor exhaled in relief so visible that the planner handed him water without being asked. And Beatrice, who has never loved an ending unless it was a comma, tapped the microphone at the reception and said, "One announcement." The room turned like sunflowers. She was not done surprising anyone. Receptions tell the truth about ceremonies. The formality relaxes its tie, the speeches remember their manners, and the dance floor judges nothing. The garden transformed gently, tables dressed in white that didn't glare, candles that warmed rather than shouted, a band that understood the assignment. Make even the shy feel rhythm in their ribs. Beatrice took the microphone not like a monarch, but like a teacher with good news. "I promised one announcement," she began, her voice riding the hush until the hush became attention. Two, actually. One for the firm, one for the city. She paused long enough for curiosity to lace its shoes. First, in honor of Nia's courage and the culture we are still building, the Adeyemi Foundation will endow the Okoye Fellowship, a paid 2-year program for first-generation law graduates committed to ethics and community lawyering. Fellows will rotate through our practice groups and spend a third of their time on pro bono clinics we will fund, staff, and measure. Excellence is not a private club. We intend to widen the door. Applause began in the corner where the paralegals sat and spread until the band's percussionist tapped his drum in assent. Beatrice lifted a hand and the sound settled, expectant again. "Second," she said, eyes flicking to HR and then to the staff who would become parents. "The foundation will fund an on-site childcare partnership for 3 years while the firm builds its own center. Parenting should not be a talent tax." The cheer this time came from everywhere at once. Even the trees seemed to consent, leaves speaking leaf language approval. Nia pressed her fingers to her mouth, undone. Adrian squeezed her hand and whispered, "Masterstroke." Beatrice shrugged, as if she'd merely adjusted a picture frame that had hung crooked for years. "Also," she added, feigning an afterthought no one believed, "musicians are here who refuse to leave until we dance." The band leader grinned and slid into a high-life groove that braided joy and history without dropping either. Elders rose with the dignity of those who know how to step without proof. Juniors followed with the exuberance of those who don't need it. Midway through the evening, Victor found Adrian by the lanterns and handed him a slender envelope. "The press statement," he said. Short and kind. Adrian read, "A garden, 2 vows, and a community. Our thanks. Back to work on Monday." He laughed, signed, and returned to the dance floor where Nia, barefoot now, taught Beatrice a move invented by teenagers and purified by grandmothers. For a moment, there was no firm, no past, no future. Only bodies unashamed of joy. Toasts threaded the night. The judge told a story about Nia cross-examining a witness so gently that the truth arrived without bruises. A senior partner admitted that he had once believed kindness was a luxury and now understood it as infrastructure. A cousin recounted Adrian's childhood habit of making contracts with ants. "You carry the crumb. I won't step here," and the way Beatrice had framed the first A he ever earned as if marks were art. When Adrian spoke, he kept it brief and precise. "Thank you for witnessing us," he said. "We will try to deserve what your presence implies." Near midnight, as the band softened and conversations found their natural endings, Beatrice tugged Nia aside and pressed a small, velvet box into her palm. Inside lay a thin gold bracelet with a disc no larger than a coin. On one side, honest or nothing. On the other, a date that had not yet arrived. Nia looked up, question in her eyes. "Due dates are elastic," Beatrice said. "But legends like to be early. Wear it when you feel afraid, and remember that fear is a visitor, not a landlord." They hugged, and Beatrice, who had orchestrated, persuaded, and conjured 100 turns for this day, finally allowed herself to rest. She watched Adrian and Nia stand a little apart from the crowd, foreheads touching, sleeves loosened, shoes forgotten, and felt the exquisite relief of a plan executed not for control but for love. The masterstroke was not the fellowship or the childcare or the press note. It was the way the garden proved a thesis. That power, when redistributed, multiplies rather than divides. Before they left, Beatrice raised the mic once more, a final benediction. "Go home," she commanded, laughing. "Even happiness needs sleep." The crowd obeyed, because sometimes joy is better when it knows when to end. The Monday after a wedding is where legends go to the gym. Flowers wilt, inboxes bloom. The world, unmoved by confetti, returns to its lists. At the firm, the shift felt less like a snap and more like setting a bone to heal correctly. HR finalized new parental leave policies. Finance built the budgets that would make them more than press. Compliance posted the whistleblower portal in 3 languages and audited it with a firm owned by women who had sued bigger companies than Adeyemi and Company and won. Performance reviews were rewritten to measure mentorship, team climate scores, and pro bono hours alongside revenue. Culture ceased to be a speech and became a spreadsheet with deadlines. Kira's absence produced a vacuum in one practice group that Nia refused to fill by martyrdom. Instead, she proposed a rotation that trained juniors to handle responsibilities Kira had hoarded. If one person's departure collapses a workflow, she told the partners, the problem was never that person. It was our architecture. The partners, chastened and grateful for the competence that did not gloat, signed off. Within a month, 3 juniors were running portions of complex matters with supervision that taught rather than terrified. Clients noticed, not the details but the steadiness. Retention ticked upward. Sloppiness ticked down. Celine met her consequences in rooms without photographers. The judge accepted the plea, read conditions into the record, and spoke directly to her. Longing is not a defense, she said. Harm dressed in nostalgia is still harm. Celine nodded. Emotion that looked like surrender, but also like the first tiny push against a heavier door. She wrote the public apology, recorded the service hours, and disappeared from the gossip circuits like a song that had exhausted its chorus. Daniel enrolled in counseling at the firm's suggestion, and to his surprise stayed. Months later, he asked Nia for a meeting not to beg a reference, but to thank her for setting a boundary he had finally recognized as a life raft. I was cruel because it made me feel less small, he said, voice without theatrics. I'm trying to learn other ways to be. Nia wished him well and meant it, which is different from offering an alibi. Inside the firm, the Okoye Fellowship launched with an astonishment that looked like gratitude. Applications arrived from universities whose names some partners had never bothered to learn. 5 fellows were chosen in the first cohort. A single mother who had studied by bus light, a refugee whose first language had learned the word asylum before it learned the word home, a farm worker's son who had almost become an accountant because law felt like a costume, 2 siblings who had decided together that justice was a family business. On their first day, Nia gave them a tour that paused not at corner offices, but at the legal aid clinic embedded into the lobby twice a week. This is where our excellence proves itself, she said, in how we treat people who can't pay us. Her pregnancy threaded through these changes like a quiet bass line, present, steady, inviting melody. The first trimester's fatigue arrived as promised. Nausea played its pranks. Beatrice's soups did missionary work. Adrian became a student of small kindnesses. Meeting blocks on her calendar labeled nap, snacks that did not condescend, chairs that understood posture. When a hearing required travel, he asked whether appearing by video would prejudice the court. Told no, he set up a space that dignified distance. He learned that support is not European chivalry but logistics and listening. At 20 weeks, the ultrasound showed a profile that made time stutter. Adrian held Nia's hand and tried to memorize the sound that would one day be a laugh. The technician pointed at the screen, tracing the map of a person on the brink of arriving. Strong, she said, and the word attached itself to everything else Adrian felt but could not name. They left the clinic holding a printout that looked like someone had sketched a moon and found it had a nose. The firm, now a little more itself, began to organize around the changes the couple had wrought and the baby had catalyzed. A mother's room was painted in colors chosen by people who would actually use it. A father's group formed without irony. The pro bono calendar filled with clinics for tenants, asylum seekers, and debtors who'd been tricked into signing documents that treated them like math errors. A senior partner who had once rolled his eyes at soft stuff asked Nia to coffee and listened to the answer when he asked how to help. Sponsor someone you don't see yourself in, she said. He did. At home, evenings grew smaller in the best ways. Books accumulated, board books, picture books. A copy of Gulliver's Travels Beatrice insisted a child should meet early, so they learned proportion. The bracelet on Nia's wrist gathered its own patina. The necklace rested in velvet, as if saving its light for a future photograph. They chose a name and did not tell anyone, keeping some slice of wonder for themselves. On Sundays, Beatrice came for tea and left with lists, recipes to pre-freeze, phone numbers of midwives, a spare key she had not needed but was delighted to receive because symbols matter. One night, as Rain rehearsed on the balcony rail, Adrian sat with a stack of policy drafts and realized the work had done something to him he could not reverse. It had made him less interested in being right than in getting it right. He closed the folder and went to where Nia slept. He watched the rise and fall of her breathing, the way rest braids vulnerability and trust, and understood that leadership, like love, is a daily craft, not a coronation. In the next room, a small space waited, a crib unbuilt, a mobile unspun. Futures often look like chores before they reveal themselves as miracles. The third trimester began not with cravings, but with weather. Lagos in March does not ask permission to rain. It simply remembers water. Nia learned to walk a little slower on polished floors and to laugh at the way strangers turned gentle when they saw her silhouette. "You carry the future like it's porcelain," a market vendor said once, pressing an extra mango into her bag. She smiled, thinking of Beatrice's insistence that maternity was not fragility but evidence. At the firm, preparations for parental leave felt less theoretical now that they had a face. Adrian's calendar filled with transition meetings. Nia trained a junior associate to handle her caseload with rigor and empathy. The Okoye Fellows shadowed her through depositions, amazed by how she disarmed witnesses with calm rather than pressure. "Truth," she told them, "doesn't respond to shouting. It responds to space." Then, one humid afternoon, the calm cracked. Nia was midway through reviewing a brief when a sharp pain cut through her abdomen. The room tilted. Adrian, alerted by the tremor in her voice over the intercom, was at her side within minutes, guiding her out while colleagues cleared corridors with the efficiency of a team that had finally learned what care looks like. The hospital ride was a blur of sirens and whispered reassurances. At the maternity ward, the doctor's face was professional, then kind. "It's preterm contractions," she said, "but we caught them early. Rest. Fluids. No stress." Adrian nodded too quickly, as if compliance could outvote biology. Beatrice arrived within the hour, armed with a thermos of pepper soup and a stubborn serenity. "She's fine," she announced to the hallway before anyone could contradict her. "We built this family on resilience. The baby knows the syllabus." The days that followed were a slow negotiation with stillness. Nia, restless by profession, learned the patience of bed rest. Adrian transformed the hospital room into a workspace. Fresh flowers, filtered sunlight, a whiteboard with gentle reminders instead of deadlines. Every evening, Beatrice would bring a story, sometimes of Adrian's childhood mischief, sometimes of her own early career battles. One night she told of the first time she had lost a case and cried in a restroom until she realized tears did not dissolve courage. "Failure is a tutor," she said, "and tutors are expensive. Get your money's worth." The firm functioned without its anchors, but not without their influence. The fellows handled client intakes, partners deferred decisions to committees rather than egos, and an email chain titled Nia's Army circulated updates about pro bono hours. When Adrian finally returned to the office for a morning, he found sticky notes on his desk reading "Get some sleep. Boss and the Empire can wait." He laughed, a sound the building had not heard enough of. By week's end, Nia's contractions subsided. The doctor cleared her to return home on modified rest. Adrian held her hand in the car, the silence between them filled with a gratitude so dense it felt like light. That night, they lay awake listening to the baby's rhythmic kicks. "He's impatient," Adrian murmured. "Or she," Nia corrected. "Either way, definitely yours, already arguing." Outside, thunder rehearsed for morning, and inside, two people practiced gratitude like prayer. When Nia returned part-time to work, she carried with her both fragility and fire. The firm had grown accustomed to her absence but greeted her return with warmth that felt earned rather than ceremonial. The first major case she resumed was pro bono, a landlord-tenant dispute that tested the firm's new ethics charter. The client, a widowed seamstress, faced eviction over a clause buried in fine print. "If we win this," Nia told her young team, "we prove our code isn't decoration." Courtrooms had always felt like theaters of logic to Nia, but this one, with its peeling paint and echoing ceiling fans, reminded her why she'd chosen the profession in the first place. The opposing counsel underestimated her, a pregnant woman arguing for the poor. He smirked through her opening, until she cited a precedent he had missed and a statute he had misread. By the time the judge adjourned, the courtroom hummed with quiet admiration. The ruling came a week later. Victory for the tenant, costs awarded. When the news broke, the tabloids called it the mother's case. Beatrice called it proof. "You turned pregnancy into evidence," she said proudly. Adrian framed the headline, but folded the paper behind the ultrasound photo, one victory at a time. At home, Nia's belly became a conversation piece for everyone who entered. The Okoye fellows visited, bearing baby books and legal queries. Victor dropped off contracts for her signature and left with parenting advice from Beatrice he hadn't asked for. Even the firm's security guards began greeting her with mock salutes. Madam Counsel, defender of babies and tenants. One evening, as the sun bled orange over the lagoon, Adrian found Nia asleep on the couch, briefs scattered like fallen petals. He gathered the papers quietly, pausing over her handwritten notes. Justice must feel like kindness, or it isn't just. He smiled, folded the page, and slipped it into his pocket. That night, over dinner, they spoke of legacy. "Do you ever think about what kind of world we're bringing this child into?" Nia asked. "Every day," Adrian said. "And every policy we change is a brick in that world's foundation." They clinked glasses, ginger ale and water, and let silence finish the toast. The call came just after midnight. The baby was ready before the calendar was. Nia woke to another contraction, sharp but purposeful. Adrian's calm fractured for half a second, then reassembled as action. The hospital room waited like an exam hall for which they had both studied and prayed. Beatrice arrived in record time, headscarf tied, faith steady. "Tonight," she declared, "we graduate. Labor is both eternity and seconds." Adrian held Nia's hand through each contraction, whispering encouragements that tangled into apologies for every discomfort he could not fix. She laughed between breaths, calling him dramatic. Hours passed measured by monitors and courage. When the doctor finally said, "Push," Nia felt a surge that was more than pain. It was history insisting on its continuation. At 4:42 a.m., under the softened lights of dawn, a cry cut the air clean. The doctor smiled. "A girl," she said. Adrian's laughter turned to tears before he knew it. Nia, exhausted, reached for the tiny bundle placed against her chest, skin to skin, heart to heart. The world narrowed to warmth, scent, and the rhythm of a new life syncing with its source. Beatrice stood at the foot of the bed, hands clasped as if in court. "Welcome, little advocate," she whispered. "Your first case is already won." They named her Maya Beatrice Adeyemi, Maya for illusion turned to truth, and Beatrice for the woman who had believed in love's structure before anyone else. The bracelet Beatrice had given Nia weeks earlier glinted on the new mother's wrist as she cradled the baby. "The prophecy keeps its schedule," Beatrice said, laughing through tears. The hospital's corridors filled with colleagues delivering flowers, notes, and policies awaiting signatures that could wait. Victor sent an email titled "Maternity Board Meeting Adjourned Indefinitely." Adrian replied with a single line. Motion carried unanimously. That night, as mother and daughter slept, Beatrice sat by the window, whispering a prayer older than the firm and younger than the sunrise. She thanked whatever force had taught her that disguise can reveal more than display, that love built carefully can outlast power built quickly, and that every empire, to endure, must relearn tenderness. Months slipped by like pages turned carefully. The firm's lobby now displayed a framed photograph of the garden wetting beside a plaque. Integrity is policy. The Okoye Fellows completed their first year, 2 joining full-time, 1 launching a nonprofit the firm agreed to support. Clients began quoting the firm's code in meetings, proof that ethics had become marketing by accident. At home, laughter replaced alarms. Maya grew fast and loud, her cradle surrounded by briefs and lullabies. Adrian discovered the art of bottle warming at 3 a.m. Nia mastered reading depositions aloud in a sing-song voice that soothed both baby and conscience. Beatrice visited often, bringing soup and unsolicited wisdom. "Leadership," she told Adrian one afternoon, rocking Maya, "is like parenting. You guide, you protect, and you pray they forgive your mistakes." The heart of the ocean necklace hung now above Maya's crib, catching sunlight into ripples. "It's hers one day," Nia said. "Not for wealth, but to remind her that love, when honest, is the finest inheritance." Beside it, the gold bracelet gleamed. Mother and daughter tethered by promises older than jewelry. On Maya's first outing to the firm, employees lined the hallway as if greeting royalty. The once cutthroat office now buzzed with softened edges. Nia, holding her daughter, looked around and saw not just colleagues but community. "You changed everything," Adrian whispered. "We did," she corrected. Later, standing under the same acacia tree where they had exchanged vows, Nia and Adrian watched the city stretch awake beyond the garden. "What do you think she'll be?" he asked, nodding toward Maya. Nia smiled. "Whatever truth needs next." As the wind stirred the leaves, Beatrice's laughter floated from the terrace, a sound half blessing, half applause. The empire she had built no longer depended on marble floors or glass towers. It lived here, in a woman's calm defiance, in a man's willingness to listen, in a child's steady heartbeat. And somewhere, perhaps, the world's scales tilted a fraction toward balance. The end.